Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Apple is shutting down 10% of its stores in the United States again, including almost all of its stores in Florida. Now, more than 30 Apple stores that had recently reopened with new safety measures in place are closed. This as cases of COVID-19 are spiking across the country, especially in Florida, California, and Texas. Texas and Florida have now halted the next phases of their reopening plans, and Disney, meantime, has postponed its plans to reopen Disneyland in Anaheim, California, indefinitely. We'll talk about that in a moment, but first, it was a volatile day on Wall Street. That said, stocks rising nonetheless. I want to bring in Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons, who's been following it all. It was a choppy session, Kaylee, but still ending the day about 1% higher. What happened?
Yeah, it's so interesting. We saw these fluctuations between positive and negative territory really until the last hour of trading, in which we saw this furious rally into the close, likely just people taking advantage of the dip, using it as a buying opportunity. I would say one caveat here is that volume was about 17% below the average for the past 20 days. So take that as you will. But obviously, investors trying to take advantage of the opportunity from yesterday's sell-off, despite the fact that we're seeing worsening headlines in regard to the spreading of the coronavirus. Texas, Florida having to pause their reopenings because of the surge in cases. And a couple noteworthy things I would point out in today's equity session were that small caps actually outperformed a bit. They took part in the rally. Of course, small caps kind of a proxy for the economic recovery story, as they are more domestically oriented. And interestingly, the NASDAQ lagged just marginally, but it wasn't tech that was outperforming, which is differing from what we've seen over the sessions in the past couple weeks, Emily.
So talk to us about the stocks then that were primarily driving the gains if it wasn't technology.
It was actually financials, which isn't something you hear all too often, at least in recent weeks. The banks were up about 2.6% in the Thursday session. But of course, that was driven mostly by optimism surrounding changes to the Volcker rule, easing up some of the regulations that banks have to face in regard to funds that they can invest in, and also margin swap requirements. But then we got the results from the Fed stress test just about half an hour ago, and that's taking a number of bank shares lower in after hours trading. Among the worst hit, Goldman Sachs and Wells Fargo, which actually fared the worst in this kind of scenario that the Fed put together, and perhaps a little bit of disappointment, too, in the fact that the Fed is capping dividends at the second quarter level and also forbidding share buybacks until at least September. So that's taking some of the bank stocks lower after hours, even though they were the strongest performers on the Thursday session.
Meantime, Kaylee, Disney ending the day down just slightly. Apple shares still rising. Talk to us about some of these other stocks where you're seeing a real impact from the virus, and, theme parks, giant theme parks planning to reopen now being postponed.
Yeah, of course, Disney is delaying what was intended to be the July 17th reopening of its Disneyland in Anaheim indefinitely. Basically, the company wasn't sure if they were going to get approvals from the government or agreements with the unions in time. And Apple, for its part, closing another 14 stores tomorrow in Florida, brings the total tally of closed stores to 32. That's about 10% of their U.S. footprint. And to me, Emily, this really just raises a question of, even if state governments aren't telling people to close down, companies might take it in and of themselves to prevent the spread of the virus and protect their employees.
All right, Bloomberg's Kaylee Lyons there with the update for us. Thanks so much, Kaylee. Meantime, more on that Disney story. Disney being pressured to delay the reopening of its theme parks in Florida a day after postponing the reopening of its California parks indefinitely. An actors union in Florida wants the same thing for Disney World cast members there. Actors Equity saying it's unclear how Disney could responsibly open as cases continue to soar. To discuss, we're joined by Bloomberg's Chris Palmieri, who covers Disney for us. So, Chris, let's start with California. Disney saying indefinitely they're not going to give a new update on their plans for reopening until at least after July 4th.
Right. A lot of pressure here in California on the company not to reopen, mostly coming from unions, although there were other petitions from the general public. The unions are negotiating. Disney says they've reached agreements with 11,000 of their 17,000 employees in California at the parks. But there's a lot of issues the union wants to see in terms of the safety about reopening.
Well, and Disney mentioned this had something to do with state regulators. How much is the state of California actually dictating what Disney can and cannot do?
Well, they have to get approval from the state in order to reopen theme parks. We've been doing it as many states have done in these stages, and so theme parks are in a later stage. And so Governor Gavin Newsom has said, that there were ongoing negotiations with the park owners about when to reopen, and he's happy that Disney made the choice that they did. He said it was based on their data. The COVID cases increasing. It's pretty clear also that the unions had written a letter to Newsom, and they were making their position felt in Sacramento as well.
This statement from Disney: given the time required for us to bring thousands of cast members back to work and restart our business, we have no choice but to delay the reopening of our theme parks and resort hotels until we receive approval from government officials. This, of course, in California specifically. What's the latest in Florida? Disney World scheduled to reopen July 11th. They certainly have reopened in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, as I understand it, successfully with new safety precautions in place. But do we expect this could impact plans in Orlando as well?
Potentially. I mean, I checked with Disney again. There's no, they're scheduled to start the first two parks there on July 11th. No change, but no one would be surprised. One of the issues the unions in Florida have specifically mentioned is who's going to pay for COVID testing, and is the company going to do that? Disney has said in a letter to the unions this week that the COVID tests are unreliable. Only 38%. Of them, 38% of them fail, and it doesn't want to be testing every single employee, before they come to the park. So that's one of the issues. They are going to take their temperatures every day, and obviously try to maintain the social distancing, mask wearing, hand cleaning, and all that other precautions.
And obviously that's a massive undertaking given the size of these parks and the typical size of the crowds. Chris Palmieri, thank you so much for that update. We'll continue to follow the story as it develops. Meantime, coming up, what does office life look like post-COVID-19, if there is such a thing? Should companies allow their employees to work from home forever? The CEOs of Slack, Okta, and Box are with us next. And later, our exclusive interview with NBA All-Star LeBron James, his thoughts on getting back to work and his mission to fight racial injustice off the court. This is Bloomberg.
I'm looking forward to the season getting restarted, getting back in the Laker uniform, and continue to push the envelope not only on the court, but off the court. Because like I've been telling a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my friends, I won't stop until I see change.
Leading a company through a pandemic is incredibly challenging and can sometimes be lonely. The CEOs of three tech companies, Slack, Box, and Okta, have been collaborating through the pandemic. All of their companies have benefited somewhat from the shift to remote work. I sat down with the three of them earlier today to talk about how they have come together and helped each other through this crisis.
We've been in the industry as CEOs for a long time, so we've gotten to know each other inevitably. Through investors or social events and so forth, and it's really been good to the job of a CEO is lonely, and it's great to have people that you can kind of commiserate at times with, people you can celebrate victories with, and in these crisis times really compare thoughts on what you should be doing next.
How lonely is that job at a time when there is so much uncertainty? We're in not just a health crisis, but an economic crisis and a social crisis. Stuart?
It's pretty lonely. I mean, I guess it always is. And I think it probably has to do a lot with the kind of decisions we're called on to make, because a lot of the job is making decisions. But we've trained up over the course of decades in certain classes of decisions and get pretty comfortable making them. And now we're facing decisions that no one has had to make before. So I think it makes it much harder. And actually, going back to how we got together, we've ended up in more or less like a mutual support group, and not just the three of us, but there's like another dozen plus people that we spend a lot of time with trying to work through a lot of these challenges.
Aaron, you have a remarkable way of finding humor in a very dark time. How do you channel that at a time like this to keep your team motivated, your customers motivated?
I do want to clarify that I don't find the humor in the darkness, but there's sometimes things that happen that are humorous amidst obviously many very difficult things. So I think what we're doing as leaders right now is dealing with some unbelievable stress in the system of everybody going and working remotely, dealing with a tremendous amount of just disruption to their daily lives, family members that might have health issues, economic issues in their networks, and now obviously layered on to many social issues of racial injustice that has been persistent in this country for so long, but obviously brought to the foreground in a much more significant way. And so these stresses add up, and I think right now it's an environment where our companies have to lead and run with our principles, and us, I guess, as leaders, we have to make sure that those principles are clear and expressed. And occasionally I might have a tweet that I might regret a few hours later, and I do end up deleting some of those, by the way.
You do. All right, I'm gonna have to track that more closely.
Sometimes I treat Twitter like a mix of a timeless content platform and Snapchat. And so I just need to get something off my chest because the administration is doing something I'm just so frustrated about. And then I go back and I'm like, okay, I'm calm now. Let's be more productive about dealing with this issue. So a little bit of a balance of that.
Well, on a more serious note, we're speaking on a day that cases of COVID-19 in California are spiking by the thousands. I mean, your CEO is responsible for leading thousands of people and keeping them safe. What goes through your head when something like that happens, when it almost felt like things were getting better? Todd?
Well, as the CEO of Okta for 11 years now, it's been an important job, but I've never had to make these kind of decisions that really have life and death and health implications for 2,500 employees. So it's something that I take, and I know Aaron and Stuart feel the same way, take it very, very seriously. And it's something that when you really have to put down your priorities as a leader, it's really clarifying. It's number one is the health and safety of our employees. And even if in the short term that might adversely impact the business, that's the decision we're going to make. So we've taken a really conservative approach in terms of working remotely, not requiring people to go back to offices, until there's a vaccine or a treatment, and it's a decision that I'm happy with.
So, Aaron and Stuart, is this changing your plans? I mean, knowing that the second wave is real, is this changing your return to the office, whatever that was going to look like?
Our plan was already, let's set a marker several months in the future and revisit then. But employees do want some certainty, so I think it's important to say, we're definitely not going to reopen before X date so people can plan their lives. I think it's also important to communicate the policies now. And I think one thing I'll try to get through briefly, but I think it's really interesting. We're all friends. We all help each other. We also compete for talent, and not just among ourselves, with Salesforce and Square and Twitter and Facebook. And that's a microcosm, like the tech industry, of the whole economy, because while I don't think of us as competing very frequently with Goldman Sachs or American Airlines, everyone's hiring more software developers. Software is becoming an increasingly important part of every single business. And even if we wanted to demand, expect, require that employees come into the office, I don't know, next January or something like that, if Todd's making an offer to that same software engineer, that same marketer, the same person says, hey, you can have flexibility. You can come into the office a couple of days a week and work from home, or you can just work remotely. You can move back to Ohio or wherever you're from, be close to family. We're not going to get that person, and people would leave Slack. So there's a lot of game theory around this. And I think the chips are already on the table from a lot of really large companies who have already made their decision. And it's I don't know if it's impossible, but it's going to be very, very hard to walk back. Like if you go down this path and 20% of your employees are remote and 50% have adjusted the way that they work and where they live to work in an environment where they're in the office a day or two a week and at home the rest, unwinding that, it's a little bit hard to imagine. So
on that note, is Jack Dorsey saying employees can work from home forever? Is that a mistake?
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's a domino tipping. I mean, I also think we're making the right choice for us, which is we are going to let people work remotely. We are going to offer flexibility. We still have to work through the ramifications of that. But going back to what's that?
Indefinitely, they can work remotely?
Yeah, because I don't know that we're going to be able to take it back. You know, if we say you're able to work remotely and you move with your family to a different state, like we can't call you up and say, all right, come back to the Bay Area and buy a house. But the COVID spiking thing, this has just been bewildering to me because, like, what did people expect? Were there people who really thought that this was over? It's been bizarre to watch it and also to watch it become a political phenomenon.
On that note, Aaron, we've seen obviously companies, different parts of the countries taking different approaches to just how serious this virus is. How do you sort of take a stand on the health and safety of your employees when it's almost strangely a political issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the most disappointing phenomenon in this already unprecedented scenario is the sort of politicizing of very basic health and safety facts. We have very few weapons against this virus. One of those weapons is wearing a face mask if you go outside or interact with people in indoor environments. And the fact that somehow that has become a statement of what side of the aisle you're on politically is shocking and very disappointing to see from our country. I mean, there's very few things where I get really energized about. Racial injustices is one. The sort of basic arguing of health facts in an environment where we as a collective have to work together to be able to go and solve this issue. And it's been, we've had a very clear leadership void in our country, and that means that companies have to step up and make these decisions on behalf of their employees, their customers, their communities, which is, I think, what we're all collectively doing. But frankly, it would certainly be way easier if you have the tailwind at your back of a government that was making sound decisions on behalf of the country on these issues.
So talking about stepping up, obviously, we're in the middle of a social crisis as well. There's, the Black Lives Matter movement. There's, just this week, it's well, how do immigrants feel about some of the decisions the president is making? Do you believe that companies don't have a choice now in taking a stand on these issues? And how do you take that stand without alienating your customers when you're global companies? Todd?
Yeah, the way we think about that is there are a lot of issues that you could argue either side politically, but then there are some fundamental issues that are in the best interest of every employee at Okta, every future employee at Okta, and all of our customers. And these are things like the health and safety of our employees. I mean, we're not going to be political about masks. Our employees should wear a mask when they go out. That's just all the evidence points to that, and that's the prudent thing to do. Racial injustice is bad for everyone. It's not a political issue. It's just a human rights issue, and it's something that's very clear that we need to stand up vehemently for as a business and as an organization, as a set of people in this society. And the political issues that are beyond that you could debate about, maybe we'll have that debate, but those issues are fundamental to us and not debatable.
So how do you think when we do return to some sort of new normal, how will life be different? How will office life be different? For example, are you going to be getting on the road and talking to customers in person day after day after day? Stuart?
A great question. And we'll see, because a lot of it is about the cultural expectations, and we all evolve kind of in concert. But one thing for sure is this is a generational shift. And I'm going to put this in terms of technology, although I think it's broader than that. It's like in the 70s, the first wave of digitization in like financial services, or the 90s, the adoption of PCs, 2000s, the spread of the internet, the early generation of cloud services, because there is going to be a much bigger reliance on technology. And in kind of back and forth with that, a little bit of yin yang, there'll be a change in how we manage. I think there's an opportunity now never waste a crisis, to reimagine how we report on businesses, how we plan, how we manage people. It behooves all of us to really to seize that opportunity and see how much, as a result of all this, we can level up.
So how is this changing the way you think about your business, how you plan for the short and long term? Aaron?
Yeah, I think I think we all represent effectively digital-first organizations that have tried to run our businesses in a very agile, fluid, dynamic way. I think what we're seeing is that the world economy now has to catch up to that way of running an organization. And so when you think about what is a digital-first business, doesn't mean it's a remote first. It doesn't mean it's office first. It's digital first. It means that people can collaborate in real time. You can work from anywhere. The business is much more fluid. And so when you think about, how do you plan for an organization in the 21st century when you have pandemics, when you have disruptions to your supply chain, you have to build an organization that can be resilient to whatever gets thrown at you. And I think that is what more and more businesses are experiencing. And the best way to do that is first of all, make sure that you have a culture and a set of principles that let you get through these types of events. And make sure that you have a way of running your business from a technology architecture standpoint that let you be resilient as well. And so whether it's the short-term pivots that companies have to make right now to enable a remote workforce, or the long-term transformation that companies have to go and drive to be digital first, I think you're going to see a completely new operating model that companies begin to incorporate going forward.
Now, given all of the uncertainty ahead and all of your employees working remotely, how do you get them all aligned, in one direction going forward? And, what's a sort of healthy dose of paranoia for a CEO to have at a time like this?
Full cup of paranoia, I would say. And I think we're still figuring out the best ways to generate that alignment. Obviously, some of them are the same. People have meetings and they did, they make presentations and write documents. But I think because we're missing a bunch of tools that we had when most people were in the office, we're still discovering ways to compensate for that.
All right, Stuart Butterfield, CEO of Slack, Todd McKinnon, CEO of Okta, Aaron Levy, CEO of Box. Meantime, going halfway around the world to the dramatic collapse of a European fintech star, Wirecard. The German-based company filed for insolvency today after admitting it could not locate more than $2 billion on its balance sheet. The former CEO, was arrested earlier this week. Bloomberg's Luca Casiraghi has the story.
Wirecard, the biggest tech company in Germany, filed for insolvency in Munich on Thursday. The company, which was in the main German stock index and briefly had a market cap of as much as 25 billion euros, has been in the spotlight for more than a year now after the FT, the Financial Times, published an investigation that questioned its accounts. The company had rejected the allegations for months, but last week admitted it couldn't locate almost 2 billion euros of cash. The revelation immediately triggered a storm on its stock, which has almost completely been wiped out, and on bond prices. The chief executive officer, Markus Braun, which has been with the company for 20 years, resigned last week on Friday and was later arrested in Munich and then released on bail. Jan Marsalek, the CEO of the company, is also being sought by the German police. The demise of Wirecard, it's important for Germany, and is raising a lot of questions among authorities because calls for deeper investigations in the company's accounts have been coming from media and short sellers for many years now. In the eye of the storm is BaFin, the German regulator, which at some point went after short sellers and journalists that had been accusing them of investigating them for stock manipulation. Another EY, also the auditor of the company, has been involved here. Because it's been the main auditor for the company for years and never flagged any issue with its accounts. The insolvency of Wirecard also raises questions for investors that have been propping up the company, even with the allegations and even after the SP investigation last year, among them SoftBank, which invested $900 million in convertible bonds in April 2019. Luca Casiraghi, Bloomberg News.
A story will continue to follow. Bloomberg's Luca Casiraghi there. Coming up, Natasha Lamb, Facebook activist investor who's been pushing for diversity at Facebook and other big tech companies. We'll talk to Natasha next. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. As the economy continues to reopen, we are witnessing a shift to a new normal, one that includes a revolution for social justice, not only in day-to-day life, but in corporations for years to come. To discuss how the city of Boston is moving forward, we're joined by Natasha Lamb, managing partner at Arjuna Capital. Arjuna Capital is an activist investor based in Boston. Natasha, thank you so much for joining us. As the economy starts to reopen, how do you expect companies to address this second shift, the shift that we are seeing on social issues, a new sort of social normal, if we will?
Right. I mean, I think the first step is to acknowledge that companies have a problem, right? We've seen a lot of messages of solidarity going out there, but the first step is to look inside and look at the structural racism and sexism within their own ranks. And that's who's in the C-suite, who's on the board, who's holding the high-paying jobs. And so solidarity is one thing, real action is another. We actually had a shareholder proposal asking for greater action on racial and gender pay equity this spring, go to a vote at 10 different companies, annual meetings. And at all of those annual meetings, the management teams and the boards opposed the proposals. That's not meaningful change. And I wonder if that would happen now, 1 month later, 2 months later, as companies are really starting to reassess what they can do to both acknowledge the problem and change from the inside out.
Arjuna Capital, based in Boston, is an activist investor in Twitter and Google and Facebook. If these companies are going to continue to turn down your proposals, can you keep investing in them?
Well, we invest in these companies, in companies like Facebook, for instance, with the intent of engaging. We think they've got a strong platform, a strong position in the market, and we've been working for the last 4 years to press for change. And we've seen some change. I mean, you saw it's not enough because certainly there's consumers and users are unhappy. You have an advertiser boycott, but you did hear Mark Zuckerberg reference the 10 million pieces of hate speech that were removed from the platform in the first quarter. The reason we know about that is because Arjuna Capital pressed for transparency on that kind of reporting. The problem is it's not enough.
Speaking of that boycott, Verizon halted advertising on Facebook and Instagram over its content policies, joining now a chorus of advertisers pulling advertising from Facebook. We don't know for how long, but how big a blow is this?
I think it's a big blow. I mean, we've been warning for years that if Facebook didn't seriously address content governance on its platform, that it would come back to bite them, and it has. And we're seeing some big brands, Verizon, I know PG&E or Procter & Gamble were looking at their spending. These aren't small brands, and it's exactly the kind of threat that we've been warning about. And it's really up to companies like Facebook to bring their critics to the table, hear what they have to say, and make meaningful change. Because going forward with the status quo is just no longer an option.
Twitter has been more aggressive in taking a stand on the president's most recent tweets, the same posts staying on Facebook unchanged. What's your take on how, since you're an investor in both of these companies, they have handled these situations so differently?
I think what we need more than anything is power and decision making in the hands of more people, not less. So when you look at Facebook and the power that Mark Zuckerberg has and the decision making around these issues of content governance, human rights, racism, sexism on the platform, it really falls on one guy. And that's, frankly, these are complex issues and it's not working. And so this spring we engaged with Facebook and Google and asked them to add a human and civil rights expert to their boards in order to have a more fulsome approach. I think you see with Twitter an attempt to do something about this, which I find really promising, but we just have not seen that with Facebook.
Now, how concerned are you about potential antitrust issues facing Facebook in particular? Because the point has been made that perhaps Mark Zuckerberg is making these decisions because he doesn't want to anger the Trump administration when Facebook is facing a threat of being broken up.
I mean, I don't think that threat's going away anytime soon. It's definitely, the elephant in the room. And when you have that kind of a monopolistic position, and frankly, you're not managing it well, if 2.5 billion users around the globe, and you're seeing, things like the Christchurch shootings that happened last spring in New Zealand being broadcast over the platform, posts from Trump about when the looting starts, the shooting starts that are inciting violence, when you're seeing the continuation of hate speech and sexism and racism on the platform during such a potent time. I think there's no question there's going to be more regulation. We've seen Zuckerberg actually welcome that. I don't think he's welcoming being broken up, but that's a long-term threat that is going to exist despite the whims of any administration.
Have you been in touch with any of the employee activists at these companies, the people on the inside who are trying to make change from within?
We see those folks as allies in pushing for change because it's not, any one company isn't just going to listen to their investors or, they're not just going to listen to a politician or just their employees. It's really about having a chorus of voices at the same time saying, hey, it's time for change. So while we're not, engaging directly with Facebook's employees, we do see it as really significant how they've stepped up and are challenging the status quo at what has historically been a very controlled, buttoned up culture, which you really see when you attend the annual meeting, just how controlled it is. And you don't tend to see a lot of dissent in the ranks. So I think it's a sign of the times and hopefully a sign of change to come.
All right, Natasha Lamb, Arjuna Kapil, always good to have you here on the show. Natasha, thank you so much for stopping by.
Thank you, Emily.
I just want to recap those headlines. Verizon now halting advertising on Facebook and Instagram, saying they're not happy with the content policies. Facebook falling 1% after hours. We don't know how long Verizon is pulling their advertising from Facebook for, but this is a story that we will continue to follow. All right, coming up on this week's cover of Bloomberg Business Week, LeBron James of the LA Lakers. Stay tuned for an exclusive conversation about the return of professional sports. This is Bloomberg. The NBA is gearing up to restart its season on July 22nd after halting games due to COVID-19. Bloomberg spoke exclusively to LeBron James of the LA Lakers about the return to professional sports.
I believe that sports in general has done so many great things for communities, for households, bringing people together. And more importantly, like you said earlier, with our commissioner and our league has always allowed us to express values and things that's going on in our lives. So, for us to be together as a league once again, along what's going on right now, it gives us another opportunity to continue to talk about what's going on, the social injustice, the police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and continue to hit home on things that's going on that matters a lot as well. But sports has always been something that kind of galvanized and brought people together and just make people feel, very uplifted. And I know in my community right now, we just, unfortunately, a beautiful 18-year-old girl by the name of Nakia Crawford was just gunned down in Akron, Ohio last week, a week after graduating high school. Just to get people's minds, not saying forget about certain situations, but to just have a breath of fresh air, to have a breath of a sense of love, what sports can bring. And I know what I do on the basketball court can bring a lot of happiness to a lot of households, including my own, and including my community and my kids. So I'm looking forward to the season getting restarted, getting back in the Laker uniform, and continue to push the envelope, not only on the court, but off the court. Because like I've been telling a lot of my colleagues, a lot of my friends, I won't stop until I see change. And I mean real change for us as a community, as a Black community, both on and off the floor. So my mission stays the same.
LeBron James speaking exclusively there with my colleague Jason Kelly. You can find more of that story in Bloomberg Business Week on the Bloomberg Terminal and the full conversation at Bloomberg.com. Now, another story in the latest issue of Bloomberg Business Week is that of WeWork founder Adam Neumann, his origins, as well as someone who sounded the alarm on WeWork, a woman named Joanna Strange. Our Ellen Hewitt is with us now to tell us more about that story. She also helped put together a new Bloomberg Tech podcast, the latest episode called Foundering WeWork. Ellen joins us now. So, Ellen, tell us a little bit about this WeWork whistleblower. Who is she and what did she do?
Yeah, her name is Joanna Strange, and she joined WeWork because a company that she worked for was acquired by WeWork, so she became an employee kind of by adoption. And, of course, usually at Bloomberg we don't talk about who our sources are, but she wanted to go public with her experience. And the story is basically that in 2016, she was a new WeWork employee, and she started to see things at work that she thought were not acceptable. She felt that they weren't being honest about a set of layoffs that were happening. They weren't speaking about it internally at the company. And she found documents at the company that showed that they were readjusting their profit projections for that year, for 2016, way down. And she was upset that the company wasn't, in her mind, being honest with its employees about what was going on. So she reached out to a reporter, which was me. And so many years ago, I wrote a story using some of the information she shared, and WeWork actually sued her. And so it's a very dramatic story that now she feels free enough to speak about. And, we wanted to tell this story in part because she's part of this new 7-episode podcast series that Bloomberg Technology is launching about WeWork. There's many different characters, and Adam Neumann is a big part of it, but one of the episodes also explores Joanna's story. So we also wanted to tell that separately in a print story in Business Week.
How is she doing now? I mean, you talk a little bit about just what she went through as she was, trying to get the story out there, talking to the FBI. And, I know that was quite harrowing.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting experience because, so WeWork sued her, and I think that's pretty terrifying for anyone. And yes, as you mentioned, about 6 months after she was sued, she received a knock on the door one evening. There were 2 FBI agents who visited her home and then proceeded to ask her for several hours about how she had gotten the information. Part of her story is that she had been given, and so she, she talks about that, and then she also explains how, in the end, WeWork won a default judgment against her and then actually never collected the money.
Interesting. So where is she now?
She lives in New York. She does other jobs. I think she just feels, an interesting experience is like she spoke out many years ago about WeWork's shaky finances. But at the time, it really didn't affect WeWork at all, right? It's kind of interesting to look back on some of the things she spoke out about, only to see that then for several years afterward, WeWork continued to raise a lot of money, do very well. And then, it was only years later that they had these problems with the IPO, and now everyone feels like maybe we should have known all along.
All right. Well, I know this is just one of many stories you are featuring on your new podcast, Foundering, the story of WeWork. A number of different characters, as you said, featured in this series. Ellen Hewitt, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. Okay, still ahead. Summer is upon us, and that comes with parents and students worried about the fall. I'm terrified. Is school going to start or not? Well, Khan Academy CEO and founder Sal Khan will be with us next. With cases of COVID-19 surging across the country, especially in states like California, Florida, and Texas, parents are asking, is school going to restart in the fall, or do we face another semester or even a year of online education? Joining us now to discuss, Sal Khan, Khan Academy CEO and founder, and Khan Academy Sal has been critical in helping so many parents get through this. Talk to us about what you're seeing and hearing now from school districts. Frankly, I'm terrified about whether my school is going to start or not and what that means for my children. What are schools telling you?
Yeah, and this, a lot of my data is even about a week ago before this recent uptick in COVID. And what we've been hearing is, the school districts had just gotten out of the room with the epidemiologists telling them what social distancing has to happen, who can come and who can't. And most of the districts we've been talking to, they were looking at things like a shift-based model where half the kids show up on one day and then the other half show up the next day. But they were still going to have to plan for a scenario where some subset of the kids are not going to be able to come on a regular basis because their families just don't feel comfortable with that. And so that was pre-COVID. They were talking about things like maybe the high school students stay virtual so that the elementary and middle school students can use the high school facility so that they can be socially distanced. So even in that world, they were thinking about a hybrid model of how do you leverage technology, things like Khan Academy and video conferencing, Zoom, Skype, whatever else, and when possible, the physical environment. And now over the last week or two, we've seen this uptick in COVID. And if you extrapolate that out for about another month when they're going to have to make the go, no-go decision about back to school, I think it's looking increasingly likely. It might look a lot more like April or May than it does like a normal back to school.
So what does that mean for distance learning and programs like Khan Academy? I mean, do you see being integrated into the curriculum now, potentially more so for years to come, given the experience that parents and schools have had with your program over the last 4 months?
Yeah, the whole reason, even pre-COVID, why Khan Academy we exist as a not-for-profit is we've always thought learning should not be bound by time or space. Everyone should have access to world-class materials. Students should be able to fill in any gaps they have. Teachers should have the data they need to address the variance in any classroom, that there's 30 kids all with different needs, all ready to learn at different paces. And then COVID hit. And we saw overnight our traffic became 250, 300% of normal. Teacher registrations, student registrations were 10 times normal. Parent registrations were 20 times normal. And so we've just been trying to do kind of a full court press on what else can we do to support not just the U.S. school system, the global school system through this crisis. So we've been doing things like daily schedules, parent-teacher webinars, learning plans. We have learning plans already out to keep people learning through the end of last school year in the summer. And now as we go into this back to school, this was even before we saw this uptick in COVID again, when we know that kids are going to have even larger gaps in their knowledge than they would have after a typical summer learning loss. We've been launching things like get ready for grade level courses, which have already been launched. They actually got launched last week, where if a student, say a rising sixth grader, they can go to the get ready for sixth grade math course, so they can make sure they can fill in all their gaps before they show up for sixth grade, and then they can learn at their own time and pace. Given how unusual this back to school is going to be, whether it's a shift-based model, socially distanced model, hybrid model, I think there's just a reality that people are going to have to lean more on Khan Academy and video conferencing than they might have at any other time. And I do think some of this is going to have long-lasting implications. One silver lining of all of this is that people have been talking about the digital divide forever. And it's been very clear that as soon as the school closures hit, that there's a subset of kids, 20, 30%, who didn't have adequate internet and computers at home. That has always been a barrier for them to be able to adopt tools like Khan Academy. People are really serious about solving that. So I think it's going to allow, if that gets solved or gets closer to being solved, the whole system can lean more heavily on things like this than they normally would have.
Now, there's been talk about the so-called COVID slide or the expected learning loss that might come as a result of all of, schools being closed, in some cases indefinitely. And I know Khan Academy has been helping there, has been a lifeline for parents. But, otherwise, how big do you think that COVID slide is going to be, and how much of a concern is that for you?
It's a huge concern. We've had school closures before. It's called summer vacation. And it's well documented that summer vacation, not only do kids not learn for 3 months, but they forget, they atrophy over those 3 months. So you're not learning and you're forgetting 2 or 3 months of content from the year before. With COVID, kids being out longer, 5, 6 months, not only are they not learning for those 5, 6 months, some of our assessment partners, the NWEA, another not-for-profit, their analysis thinks that it could be a year of learning loss. And what's really scary about that is that's a year on average. So maybe your or my children might be able to keep up and not have much learning loss at all because they're able to stay engaged. Their schools have had the resources to keep them learning. And so for every kid who is able to keep up, that's probably another kid who's maybe losing 2 years, or 2 other kids who are losing a lot more. And then another thing that a lot of people are starting to bring up is, I think we've all been in a situation, we know people, if you've been out of the workforce for a year or 2, it's very hard to even just get into the patterns of work. Imagine if you're an 8 or 9-year-old or 12-year-old who just hasn't been in the patterns of school for a year, what that might do to their ability to engage. So it's a really scary thing. People are talking about a potential lost generation.
So quickly, we've got about a minute left. Sal, what is your advice to parents whose children might be in that situation? What can they do?
My advice is, as much as possible, try to keep them learning over the summer. It doesn't have to be something complex. It could be as little as 20 minutes a day. Khan Academy is free, not-for-profit, non-commercial, no catch there. We're funded with philanthropic donations. So try to keep them learning on Khan Academy, especially in math, because that's where the gaps hit you the most if you let those skills atrophy. As you go back to school, hopefully your teachers are going to be able to use our Get Ready for Grade Level courses. Don't stress about it. At the end of the day, the key is build a habit, whether your school is supporting it or not. If your children can get 20 or 30 minutes a day in math, reading, and writing, they'll be okay. But if they don't get that, then we could get into some of these scarier scenarios.
Saul, we've got about now a minute left, and you're joining us as part of some special Boston coverage coming up. You went to school in Boston. You started your career in Boston. It's obviously a place where there are several storied educational institutions. How much of an impact did the city have on you and this original Khan Academy idea? 30 seconds.
Oh, well, no, I mean, I kind of, Boston, I have some of my best memories there. Went to undergrad and grad school in Boston. Huge impact on me. I have to say, Khan Academy, in many ways, my undergrad, I went to MIT, and, they did open courseware in the late 90s, early 2000s. And they said, as a matter of principle, knowledge should be free to the world. And they took that on themselves. And so when I started Khan Academy, there was debate about whether it be for-profit or nonprofit. I remember that stake in the ground that MIT took.
Okay. Saul, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, Sal Khan, the CEO of Khan Academy. That's it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.